Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
In this episode, my guest co-host and I speak to an expert on comic books about why superheroes are so often single. We find out how the mission of the superhero creates singleness. We also discuss why you should direct the movie of your life rather than be the hero in the movie of your life. And we learn about our guest's 4 rules for literature and living. And we'll typically tape bonus material for people who sign up for the Solo community. For now, I'm adding this bonus material to the end of the episodes. This week, we talk about a solo activity, riding motorcycles. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is William Kuskin. William is a tenured full professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. His research area is the history of the book. In 2013, he launched the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course, called Comic Books and Graphic Novels, which has served 80,000 students. He's written about medieval manuscript production, the emergence of printing, William Shakespeare, and the modern comic book. He's also served as the chair of the English department and as the university's vice provost and associate vice chancellor for strategic initiatives. William is also a friend, confidant, and inspiration to me. We're joined by a special guest co-host, Kim Terabil, who appeared in episode 1. Kim is a writer, Reiki practitioner, and certified yoga teacher. She's a graduate of the University of Hawaii with a degree in English literature. She is 36, single, and lives in Boulder, Colorado with her 2 dogs. Welcome, William. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Thank you for that warm welcome. It's great to be on your show.
It's great. So my Humor Code co-author, Joel Warner, has appeared on my other podcast, I'm Not Joking. And on that podcast, we talked about what he looks for when he profiles someone for a feature article. And his goal is to find a magnificent obsessive. That's a term that he got from his mentor. William, since he's written a really wonderful feature on you in Westward, you qualify as a magnificent obsessive. What makes you a magnificent obsessive?
So, Joel didn't tell me that.
Well,
and now I'm thinking in my head, boy, I am really obsessive. I really like my things. Like, my things are really important. My comic books are important. My motorcycles are important. Oh, my kung fu weapons, they're important. So all these things are really important. And you know what makes it not just magnificent, but obsessive?
Yes.
Is that I'm 54 now. Almost 54. I'm 53. And as I've grown to learn how my mind works, I realize that I can't keep a lot of variables straight. So I have to focus in on maybe 1 or 2 qualities and really think about them. So like a comic book, I don't read all comic books, but boy, the ones I focus on, I really focus on.
Okay.
So that's the obsessive quality.
All right. So this is a perfect segue. So we're actually going to talk about motorcycles in the bonus material for the community.
Another obsession.
Yeah. So we're going to get back to that, but there's really there's 2 main reasons why you're on the podcast. So first of all, you're not solo. You're married, and so that works against you. But I think you live a remarkable life, and so I wanted to have you on here, especially before I leave town. And then the other one is because you are an expert in comic books. Not only are you an expert in comic books, but you're as will be revealed, I think, is that comic books have helped you change your life. But I'm going to start with the tough questions, and that is, why are so many superheroes single? And then the question is that true of heroes more generally in books and movies?
That's fascinating. I'm obsessing on it right now. And it's a great question. And it's interesting because Because one answer is, oh, no, they always have sidekicks. The sidekick is critical. Robin, Bucky, villains like Catwoman can become a sidekick at any moment, right?
Yes.
But really, that's avoiding the main topic. And I think you're right that there is a kind of isolationism to heroism, at least to superhero heroism. And it's interesting. You always said I'm an expert, and it's funny how comic books, for the first 100 years were the retreats of the illiterate, the semi-literate, and the moron, right? So now to be a professor of comic books.
That explains why I liked them so much when I was 18.
But, there are only two superheroes. There is Superman, who was originated in 1938, and then there was Batman, who originated the year after as a direct commercial response to Superman. And if you think about these two heroes, Batman and Superman, they're the same, but diametrically opposed, right? So Superman has all these powers. He doesn't wear a costume. I mean, when he walks around, he doesn't wear a disguise except his sunglasses.
Yes.
And then becoming Superman from Clark Kent is ripping off his clothes, right? He rips off his clothes and he's in his underwear and he feels great.
Yeah.
Now he's in his underwear and he's more of himself, and that's just super, right? Mm-hmm. It's super to be him. Being a superhero for Superman is to release, right? Being a superhero for Batman is the exact opposite, right? He doesn't have superpowers. He doesn't have superpowers, and becoming Batman is a process of involution, of masking himself, of stopping being Bruce Wayne and covering it over. And in turn, Superman, right? He goes up in the sky. He goes into the light. In some stories, right? The sun gives him his power. Batman goes into the night and he cloaks his body. But there's no question that night figure is more true, right, than Bruce Wayne. I mean, Bruce Wayne's like a cardboard cutout. Yeah, he's boring. He's not even drunk. He's pretending to be drunk. He's just there. But Batman is the truth. So these two guys, Superman becomes more himself by appearing more genuine. Batman becomes more himself by appearing less genuine, more of a burlesque or even a sadomasochistic version of himself. Superman's goal is to go out and save airplanes and skyscrapers from tumbling. Batman's goal is to go out at night and inflict violence, right?
Beat up the bad guys.
And he never gets them all, right? Gotham apparently is inexhaustible, right? So yet, what is similar about these two heroes, these two notions of heroes, is that, well, before I get to that, any superhero you mention, you think about, is either Superman or Batman or some mix of both, right? So Iron Man, right? Mm-hmm. That's just Batman, right? It's a rich guy who drinks a lot and puts on an outfit, and then he has powers like Superman, but it's Batman, right? Mm-hmm. Spider-Man, well, he's kind of a Batman, right? Because he blundered into his superpowers and he gets garbed up.
But Wonder Woman is like Superman.
She's very much a superwoman, right? Yes. She's very much that. But Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, who follows on pretty close, they're all orphans by degree, right? So this goes back to your central point. They are all orphans. Superman literally was like Moses, put in this crate and sent to Earth. Yes. And then discovered, and he's adopted by some Kansas people. That's nice. But he's alone. And no one in the world, his essential question is, how do I fit in on this planet where
no one is like me?
Well, and if I French kiss someone, my tongue will destroy their mouth, right? Let alone if we go further than that, right? So
poor Superman.
His journey is this, he'll never fit in. He can't fit in.
Yes.
And then Batman, his two parents are brutally killed in front of him, and he can never get over that. He's orphaned, but he's very much spiritually orphaned. Yes. And his question is less, how do I fit in the world? Because I think he's accepted that he'll never fit in, right? He'll never just walk along. His question is, how do I function effectively in a world in which my traumas are so painful? Wonder Woman, she leaves her world. Mm-hmm. She leaves her world because she's driven to make a change in the world. And if she stays on her island, she is lauded, but she doesn't feel she will make the change in the world. So she has to kind of orphan herself.
Yeah, this is super interesting. So my question was not married, and then what you're saying is that these people are truly solo in the sense of the word.
And if they go get married, they're still solo. And I think that hits at a really important sense of what is solo, what does it mean to be single, and then what do you look for when you partner with someone for a short time or a long time? Does that partnership, is it an attempt to fit in the world? Or is it more like Batman, yet another compromise that one has to make to be effective in the world?
Yes.
Right? To say, well, look, I can't wrestle with this my whole life, so I'm going to make some compromises that allow me a degree of functionality, right? So I guess, for me, superhero comics, as well as graphic novels that aren't superhero themed, are essentially a meditation on the self. And the thing about comic books is that they're differently visual than just reading a novel or watching a show. Comic books invite a very strange cycle of reflection. They're like books in that they ask you to kind of turn pages and then turn back. But they're also like TV or movies in that you're just looking, right? So comics walk this strange intellectual area, which I would argue is reflective on how you think about your own imagination.
So real quickly, is there a difference between a comic book and a graphic novel?
Oh, that's a great question, and has been debated by endless obsessive fans. And
yes or no, William?
No. It's all comic books. So increasingly people argue that there is a difference, and that graphic novels belong to a more high art world. They're not superheroes, but that's just nonsense. All comic books have a kind of derogatory beginning in that they begin in the funny papers. They originally were literally freebies, Langnap, the gas stations or Procter & Gamble would give away. And they've since developed a real following over 100 and so years. But there's no difference. It's all pictures and words.
Okay. Just to clear something up really quickly, because I'm not a comic book reader, my experience was Google stalking you last night and watching some of your YouTube videos, I feel like was my exposure to comic books. So I know Superman had Lois Lane, right? Did Batman have a lady friend?
I think there's been lady friends across time. In one pivotal issue, he falls in love with, he and Catwoman finally get together.
Oh,
takes a long time. And in one, I think it's some recent issue 1000, there's a potential marriage.
Okay.
But Batman is always alone.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about this. So first of all, I think this is, thank you for showing that I made the right choice, having you on here. So I think this idea that the superhero, the nature of being a superhero, that idea of being different, being an outsider, can be so profound that it makes it difficult to sort of fit in with the regular population. I think that's a neat idea, in part because I actually think that that there are people in the world, they're not real superheroes, but they are living remarkable lives, that at the very least, marriage is inconvenient. It gets in the way. It'll get in the way of a lot of really interesting things that people feel compelled to do. And so please.
Or it's just a compromise that doesn't allow you to be effective. It's a compromise that compromises something too fundamental to the mission, right?
Yes, that's
but
right.
It's like, I don't think you're going to want to go out and fight bad guys when you can just sit on the couch and Netflix and chill with your, with your lady friends.
So it's interesting, right? So Peter Parker, who is Spider-Man, right? So he's another fascinating superhero, right? Because he's the original misfit, right?
Yes.
He's the nerd. He's the kid that gets the flushies in high school.
Yeah.
And then he gains these powers, at pretty much the same time his body is going through puberty, and the powers involve a lot of stickiness and kind of awkward limminess. So it's just this kind of allegory for puberty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he falls in love with this one stunning bombshell, who's very cool.
I remember reading Spider-Man and Mary, what's her name?
Well, first he falls in love with Gwen Stacy.
Okay.
And Gwen Stacy is killed in issue 121. This rocked the comic world because usually in comics, none of the players die, right? It's a franchise. And if you kill off your franchise, you have nothing to sell.
This is pre-Game of Thrones when people would get offed regularly.
So she is thrown from the Brooklyn Bridge, and Spider-Man leaps off the bridge and tries to web her. But when he webs her, she's falling so fast that her neck breaks and she dies. And Peter Parker falls in love with Mary Jane afterwards. He repairs himself to the degree, but Gwen Stacy really dies in the initial comic. So the rest of the hundreds and decades of Spider-Man is kind of him negotiating how he's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but also chilling on the couch, right?
Yeah.
With Mary Jane, who later becomes some Spider-Woman herself. So the issue of being single and devoting yourself to some kind of mission,
Yes,
right?
A mission.
And for superheroes, the mission is kind of made spectacular and involves beating people up. But we're all on some kind of mission, right? Or we've pointedly said...
Or we should be, as I like to say.
Well, right? We may say, you know what? I'm not on a mission. I just want to do my job, make my payments, and raise my kids. And
that's a mission in itself, as you know.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
But there are levels of complexity of decision-making,
Indeed.
right? And I think Batman... So it's interesting, right, that Superman movies don't work anymore, right? They just... Even when you hire a really muscular, handsome guy.
They're a little too clean and tidy.
And then they try and make him dark, and he can't be dark. But Batman movies work more than ever. And
can I interrupt with a piece of data? I am working on a movie project, and I'm interested in the quality of films and their success. And so one day on a hair, I asked a grad student to create a figure for me. I said, welcome to the pyramid scheme that is higher education. As my vice provost and associate vice chancellor laughs at that. And I plotted quality of film on the y-axis against payout, like box office.
Interesting.
On the x-axis. And there's like a single film that sits in the top right corner of that figure.
According to the graduate student.
According to IMDb and then database. Like, this is thousands of people's judgments and which are highly correlated with critics. So this is a very stable judgment of the goodness of a film. And then obviously the box office stuff is well documented.
I can't wait to hear what the film is right now. There's some build up.
Driving Miss Daisy.
It's The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight. The first one?
No, there was Batman.
Oh,
Batman Begins or something like that.
Yeah.
The Dark Knight, which, who was
with Heath Ledger and the Joker.
Yes.
That's it.
That's the one.
Well, that's an amazing movie. It's really, really dark.
It did incredibly well. And who was the...
Christian Bale.
Yeah, and who was the director of that? Do you remember?
The other Christian.
What is the guy?
The guy who did...
he just did the beach movie in World War II. Oh, sorry.
I'm not a movie
buff.
That's
fine. It'll come up.
Idea.
He's actually... Williams, I told him to turn off his phone. He said it's off, but now he's Googling.
It's silent.
So the point is, I offer that up as I think very strong evidence for the fact that Batman works, because that means Batman works for a broad audience, not just for fanboys of superhero movies.
So I'm going to avoid trying to figure out who the director is, because
it doesn't matter.
But I actually think this is a really important point. When I first started teaching comics in 2005, I was teaching comics as comics, and we got a lot of comics and read them. And it occurs to me that really since Marvel was bought out by Disney in 2009, comics have changed, and they're no longer married to books. Comics are a world culture. I was in Moscow last December, and it was really chilly, and I went into a toy store. And you walk into the toy store, and the first display is Captain America. I mean, when I grew up, Captain America was fighting commies, right?
Yes.
And now that to a kid walking in there, that's his culture or her culture. That's shared ownership. So those kids, I'm pretty sure, haven't read any Jack Kirby Stan Lee comic of Captain America, but they own Captain America. So a little later, I went and I watched Endgame, and I had some business in the UAE, so I was on the phone the next morning after I watched it with a guy from the UAE. He'd already watched Endgame twice, and he was a UAE Emirati. So the amount of the way comics have become truly global and speaking to the world is a real change. And we are in this incredible economic, environmental, technological revolution right now. And it's a disruption. And I don't think anyone can say that it's entirely positive or entirely negative. But everyone, I think, realizes that it's impacting them in ways they never thought, even 10 years ago, it would. And the art form that seems to be speaking to the planet right now is not theater. It's a subset of film and television arts derived from giveaway comic books. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're at an amazing moment where superhero art seems to be the art of our transitionary period. And that is a wild thing. I'm actually sitting here with these two very gracious people in my office, and you can't see, but the pillow that is in my chair is Superman in an Arabic headscarf.
Yes.
And I bought this it was actually a gift when I was in Dubai. Someone gave this to me. So again, it's a global culture that has really elected through market forces to imagine individuals who are fundamentally isolated and devoted to a mission that may destroy them emotionally and physically. And yet they aspire to heroism within that confine.
So
And I think it's an amazing point that this art that in the early 20th century was, again, derided for less than literate, right? Mm-hmm. Is now has captivated the globe.
So I just want to make sure that you're on record saying that there's an emerging global culture that is basically built on single people.
I mean, I don't think
I said that.
I think it is of the single hero, right?
I get it, yes.
I mean, even if you think about the Avengers, they're such a loose-knit group that they spend most of their time fighting one another.
Yeah, right.
Or at least horribly humiliating one another. And I mean, it's not like the X-Men. The X-Men are
they live in the same house.
Mutant students
right. Yes.
who have come to this. They too are often orphaned or alienated from their communities. Mm-hmm. But they come to a school and they find meaning in the community, mm-hmm. right? But this is different. I mean, as close as you get is like the Black Widow and Hawkeye.
Do you think like the themes today that we're dealing with in comic books are, more relevant to society now? Have they grown and changed with the times?
I think it's amazing. I think that comics have always belonged to the kind of magnificent obsessives, but now Endgame, I think it's already made $2.7 billion in revenues. Mm-hmm. So it's clear that it speaks not to someone, but to everyone. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that what Marvel Studios has done so successfully is interlinked the stories it tells. So I think there's 22 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And what they've done so wonderfully is serialized the movie format so that one movie is but a thread into the larger pattern of all the movies. And that's interesting because I think it goes back to this issue of singleness and soloness. Because though the movies depict individual heroes grappling with, each one has their own neuroses and anxieties, and they have to work together, what the warp and woof of the movies show us is continuity and network. And I think that's a large part. It's not just the superheroes. It's the continuity between the individuals. And if I can push this a little bit,
sure.
I think that goes to their singleness. Because I think being single is not just, if it's about being alone and a shut-in, then it's kind of a torturous failure, right? Mm-hmm. If you're just single and you spend all your time chilling in front of Netflix by yourself, then there's a kind of painful misery about it.
Yes.
So being single is very much, I think, about balancing your network and your continuity with your singlehood identity. And I think that essentially that's fundamentally what the movies are acting out for us, right? Is that you're looking to see Iron Man's, Tony Stark, the marvelous Robert Downey Jr.'s relationship between all these different people, and yet his singularity,
yes.
right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I'm loving this because I mean, you know, the goal of this podcast is a positive view of an unmarried life. And so I think what happens is when you talk about solo, being single, people go to that shut-in, that person who's lonely, that person who can't make it work. And what you're describing is, on a global scale, that there's these compelling stories that are built on, yes, people who are flawed, but people who are also doing magnificent, or as I would say, remarkable things. So
I just want to back it up a little bit,
sure.
too, and recognize that, being married, let's not just pretend it's the man in the gray flannel suit and 1950 and everyone's just delighted. I mean, being married is a negotiation of your single identity and then your group identity. And that, too, it's more similar than perhaps it initially appears, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I just have to draw some line in the sand.
No. I think the single person is forced really to monitor that network continually and work it through and keep it with electrical energy, or else they do risk but quite honestly, I mean, a lot of marriages fail because they're not monitoring how that network is played out between the two people.
Kim would call that vibrations.
Energetic vibrations, attracting each other on the same level.
That's right.
So just to kind of shift directions a little bit, I was wondering, Batman has this origin story where it's very painful. He experienced this trauma in his life, and he goes on and uses that in almost like this positive way. Do you have any advice for people on how they can kind of take the own pain in their life and shift it into something positive?
This might be time for a personal anecdote.
Okay, I didn't want to come right out and ask about it, but
So Kim, I mean, I think that is, so for me, Batman is ultimately the hero. And that story of trauma re-channeled, right, is the story of superheroes. And it's such a powerful story in one's life. And I guess for a long time, I grappled with how persona relates to private, right?
I need to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, because you're getting into something that I think it'll help if we become a slightly more linear about. So you have these 4 rules for literature and life. Okay, so it's for literature and life.
Yeah,
and I think you're about to talk about number 3.
Yeah, I have been out of the classroom now for 4 years. I've been in this kind of businessman role. So the Cuskin rules, I haven't gotten to truck them out enough.
Okay.
Well, Peter has them written down.
I have them written down.
All right.
In case you forgot them. So first one is break down the problem into its component parts.
That is circle the details.
Okay. Second is synthesize the details.
Bring those parts together in your own way of thinking.
Okay. And then the third one is writing creates a persona. And I think you allude to this idea is that each of us should have a superhero persona, and which is, I think, where you're headed with your story. And then the fourth one, which I like a lot, but I think you can't skip to it, is create a plan for success.
So those are the Cuskin rules, and they're important. And as I said in the beginning, it took me a long time to understand how my mind works. And 4 rules pretty much stretches my mind beyond 1 rule.
Okay.
Right? Like 1 rule I can handle. But it is interesting to think how much complexity people can tolerate and still be coherent. And for me, for me, it's all about using something very simple to become complex. So those 4 rules to me are something that I teach, that I use students. I don't really flatter myself to think that students are going to remember anything I taught them about a topic, but they might remember an approach to a topic because they could apply it later to something that really matters.
So you have even higher standards than I do. So my goal is to create an emotion within my students. So all I want them to remember is an emotion that is positive about the things that I've been teaching.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So all analytics taught in the university system, in my mind, come down to the 2 first rules. Break it down and add it up. And if you break something down, you have a chance of understanding a piece of it. Most things are too hard to understand in their totality. But if you break it down, you can say, what piece do I understand? Adding it up is a way of understanding that you yourself are a mechanism for computation, and you take those component parts and add something of yourself, and that's often termed creativity. Creativity is a daunting word.
Okay.
I think that writing is a fundamental skill, and when I use the term writing, I'm referring to all kinds of composition, including public speaking. But what people forget is that presenting something is very frightening, and that fear is overwhelming. And if you believe that you're actually putting yourself out there, that it's really little Willie Cuskin standing in front of the world, you quickly become overwhelmed by all the flaws of little Willie Cuskin that are now on display. So I guess this shows that I'm a Batman, not a Superman, because Superman, he's one step away from ripping off his shirt and pants and leaping into the air,
at any
stark
moment.
naked, right? He's happy with who he is. And why not? He can crush anyone in the universe.
And he has those red underwear.
Right,
Those are
red underwear. Batman needs to shroud himself, to cover himself up, in part to protect that child, right? That is fundamentally damaged and will never heal. So I would suggest that when you write something, you're not really putting yourself out there. You could do an autobiographical piece, but even if you were going to do an autobiographical piece, you're constructing it. You're constructing it as much as Batman's costume.
Yeah.
And you're putting something out into the world that is deeply constructed, and you want to shape your reader's relationship to that. And then, you know what? If you get a bad grade on it, or someone criticizes it and says, oh, Cuskin's article sucked, and here's all the problems with it, it's not me. It's something else. It's an object I created. And I want to take this to one more level.
Sure.
Which goes back to the question, Kim, you asked about, how does this really help us, and how does it help us get us through our own traumas? And I want to emphasize that creating something, whether it's a persona that you display on YouTube, whether it's a painting, heaven forbid, whether it's a comic book, creating something is generative. It's generative, something bigger than you that is yet expressive of who you are. So art, and I use that term as loosely or as tightly as you want, art is generative. It is generative of something beyond you, and it is generative of something in your audience. And to a certain extent, you can control what your audience feels, but really the art goes out, it goes away from you. People make of it what they will. It's bigger than you. But that creation of generative, it's something deep inside us that we need to do. And in that, it's positive. It's more than that. It's hopeful. So kind of what I come to with comics is that art is generative. So there is always hope. I mean, we're dealing with a plague of suicide in our society right now. And that seems to be some kind of message from the Joker that has just crippled who we are. It's a kind of existential nihilism that just we can't understand. But I would offer in the face of that we also have the power to create something that expresses us but goes beyond us. And in that lies meaning and light. And I would hold up art in this time of commerce and technology as a succor in the darkest of our times.
You just said something that I think, but much more eloquently than I can ever say, which is I'm always pressing people to create more than they consume. And the idea is that it's easy to consume and there's lots of good stuff to consume. And I'm looking at Kim.
I know.
I've been.
I got a pep talk this morning about creativity. Yeah,
her writing. But the idea is now you've, as you said, creating is generative. Consuming is not generative, and creating forces you to grow. And so, regardless of what you create, the act of creating makes you a better person.
Yeah.
I want to give the mic back to Kim in a second, but I want to ask you, I have a superhero persona for you that I think of. And that is, I think of you're like Tony Stark to me in many ways. And because of your personal story, and because you have like the Tony Stark charisma, which I find really appealing. Both in the comic books and my interactions with you. And then also the challenges that Tony Stark has. And then the brains that he has. Do you agree or disagree with my assessment?
Well, that's incredibly flattering, P. And how could I agree? Because it would be like an act of hubris. I would say that in 2006, I discovered I had a congenital heart problem that really it put me on my back heels. And just this year, I had a test and I discovered that it was far worse. It had progressed intensely. And the doctor literally told me that I wasn't going to make it to 60. Mm-hmm. And in between 2000...
The look on Kim's face right now.
In between 2006 and the present, I'd written an article called Iron Man's Heart, in which I did liken myself to Iron Man because, of course, Iron Man has he's in Vietnam or in various tellings. He's in Afghanistan, but Tony Stark, shrapnel hits his chest and it wedges itself in there, and he has to create the Iron Man suit, and particularly a kind of
energy source
mm-hmm. that he inserts into his chest to keep going. So Iron Man is like Batman, in that there's some inner flaw that he can't eradicate. In the movies and in later comic books, he does eradicate it. And in fact, in this recent heart thing, I had to get an MRI, and boy, did I feel like Iron Man, because they inject you with a paramagnetic metallic that they put into your bloodstream. And of course, Iron Man has all these nanite devices in his bloodstream now. So I really felt like Iron Man. So the story is kind of happy. After the MRI, it was discovered that the initial measurements that the technician did were way off, 30% off. Whew. And I have a kind of another lease on life past 60. But for a long time, I identified with Batman, in part because my parents went through a really brutal divorce when I was young. And that kind of changed my relationship to both of them, but also how much trust I was willing to put in anyone. And now I guess I have moved, you flatter me so much. I don't think, Robert Downey Jr., what a guy, right? So if only. But yes, I suffer some heart troubles, and I'm trying to compensate for them too.
Fair enough.
And I've also decided I have a big Batman tattoo. So I think, the next tattoo has to be a big Iron Man tattoo.
Where's the Batman tattoo?
The Batman tattoo is tucked in my inner bicep.
As an aside, you also have a Chaucer tattoo.
I do have a Chaucer tattoo.
Oh, yeah.
Another hero.
Is there a correlation between, because you went from medieval literature to comic books, is there a correlation in themes between the two?
So there certainly is. And, the realm of the fantastic, it belongs to the Middle Ages. And they knew it belonged to them, right? Because the Middle Ages was a fantastical time, but they also wanted to tell stories of magic mm-hmm. and of heroic deeds beyond, and of gothicness. And that's all tied into superheroes. So it wasn't a huge jump for me to go from medieval. What was really interesting is teaching Chaucer and medieval literature is so wonderful because Chaucer in particular is just he is a Robert Downey Jr. Everything comes out of his mouth with a snide smirk, and he's asking you to think about the third entendre, right? but it takes so long for students to understand what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
Because the spelling is weird.
Yeah, you need someone
I
translating.
could see you like up there performing it. Like if I were in college taking
when in
Chaucer, you would,
April with his shower short, the Dracht of March had perched to the Rota.
So, do you know? Can you check this fact for me? That Chaucer first used the word bachelor in Canterbury Tales.
It would be hard to believe he's the first.
Okay, but it does appear.
We could. I'm sure
it
the
appears
Knight
in there,
Bachelor.
but
yeah,
maybe in written word. I don't know. Any case, but it's
so for a long time, like hundreds of years, people wanted to attribute everything in English to either Chaucer or Shakespeare. He made it up.
Got it.
He may have.
I don't know if he captured it or whatnot.
Right. We could look that up, and I might be damn wrong.
Okay,
I might be damn wrong.
I've been lazy, so I thought I would.
Yeah,
I thought you were an expert.
One of the problems with only being able to think about one thing is you can't remember facts that well.
It's fair. I want to. We do have to wrap soon, unfortunately, because you're on a timeline, and so is Kim. But there's something I want to talk about because I think it's highly related to this idea of writing creates a persona. And so I do a thing at my very last class with my MBA students where I ask them. Sometimes ask them 3 questions, sometimes ask them 4 questions, depending. And these are questions to answer over break. So after the class is over, I want you to answer these questions.
do you wait until they turn it in to grade them?
No, I don't get. They don't have to. They never respond to me. It's just.
Okay.
I'd like you to think about these things. And one of the questions is: are you the hero in the story of your life?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a great question.
And then I use that as a moment to teach them the hero's journey. At least I have my own version. Like Joseph Campbell might be pissed if he heard mine. But the idea essentially is that in a hero's journey, the protagonist, you, have a call to action, and this call to action is not one that you welcome. Typically, it's resisted, and you can find this a lot. So Kim's on her own hero's journey, and she has been resisting her call, I would say.
Wow.
I would say that too.
Which is to dedicate herself as a writer. So she is a writer first, not just because she writes it first in her bio, but in her heart and
like
her
actually
actions.
own that. That's my intention. I'm going to live up to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the thing that I love about the hero's journey, first of all, is that the hero's journey is filled with challenges, right? It's filled with challenges, right? So no one wants to read a story or watch a movie about a hero that it's easy. Like even Superman, you have to find ways to make it hard for Superman. That's part of the reason why Superman's hard to watch, because he's too good.
Right.
Those challenges are both external and internal. And I think that's an important thing for people to recognize. That is that yeah, there are villains trying to stop you, but there is also your own internal dialogue and your emotions and the way you see the world. And for someone to complete the journey, they often need other people, like along the way. They often need their enemies. They need the villains to do this because and they have to. And so they have to overcome some physical obstacle, and they have to overcome some emotional or psychological obstacle. And those things often are one and the same. They come together in some way. And I think seeing yourself on a hero's journey, first of all, makes it easier to understand how fucking hard it can be. Right? And the bigger the mission, the harder it's going to be. The second thing is that that you have to recognize that you have to fundamentally change. You know, you have to actually recognize that you're holding yourself back as much as the villains of the world are holding yourself back. What I liked about your writing a creative persona is it's connected to an idea that I've been developing that I think is particularly apt for solo. And it's not, are you the hero of the story of your life, but it is, are you the director of the story of your life, right? So the story of your life is a heroic journey, but you're not a passive person. You are actually the person creating
I like that.
the whole thing. So are you the director of your hero's journey?
It's tremendously powerful, everyone who's listening to this podcast is right now reflecting on what you've just said, and they're thinking about, in fact, what ways they've abnegated the heroic relationship. And really part of what you're saying is, if you're not the hero of your journey, the hero of your life,
yes,
well, who the heck is?
Exactly.
I mean, who's going to be?
Get
your
started,
mother?
people.
Your father? Your brother? I mean, if you're not taking charge of your life, then what life is lived? I take your point about the director,
yes,
because what you're getting at there, the hero, I mean, the ultimate hero is Gilgamesh, because he started us all out with the epic,
yes,
right? And his inheritor is the Odysseus, who's perhaps the greatest hero. And, you know, Odysseus is a wonderful character because, you know, we think of him blinding the Cyclops and doing these things and shooting the arrow. But what he really is a storyteller. And he tells stories. A good percentage of the Odyssey is him recounting it. So who the heck knows what happened? But he tells a great story.
I bet.
And part of what you're getting at with the director is that a life needs to be shaped and a story needs to be told. And when stories are told, they take on proportion and meaning. If they're just rawly experienced, they're incoherent.
Yeah, and maybe it should be the author of the story.
I wouldn't give up hero. I think that that the original way you told it, again, I'm flattered by your thinking about my ideas, but the original way you told it has all the drama that you intend. And to lose that drama, what you're giving your audience, your MBA students and us, is the moment of recognition that if we don't take intentional responsibility, no one will.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's a powerful recognition.
Yeah, I think for the bolder people, what they're saying is you have the power to manifest the things in your life and just call it in.
Bolder translation.
Just bolder translation. Get your crystals on, ladies.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's interesting because the way the doctors describe my heart is they describe it as turbulent. Because the way the shape of my heart is, the blood doesn't just enter smoothly. It encounters a narrows, which, like a narrows in a river, creates this, you know, all the
rapids.
The rapids.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm grappling with right now is how my own turbulence is expressed as ambivalence, and how that makes me an ambivalent hero in my own story, which obviously, you know, Batman, well, at times Batman is ambivalent, right? I mean, faced with the Joker, he recognizes so much of the Joker in himself that he can't simply kill the Joker. You know, Batman has this oath that he's never going to kill anybody, but that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, he beats people so badly and he unleashes various missiles and weaponry. I mean, but he can't bring himself. He too has that ambivalence.
Yeah, I see.
I think, you know, Tony Stark is drunk so much of the time that I'm working on that too.
We're almost out of time, Kim, but I want to give you one more question.
Okay.
Your best question.
My best question.
Your best question.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's the best, but it's the most important. Where can I get your cutout action figure? That was for your online course.
Yeah, there were cutout action figures for the online course. That online course was great. It had its own comic book that went with it. We got you know, I'm going to have to rebuild that, and you're going to have to sign up, and there'll have to be more cutout action figures.
Okay, I'll do it just for the action figure.
So I think it would be fitting. First of all, thank you. This is fantastic. You sign your emails. You have a saying.
Onwards.
And what is the origin of saying onwards?
I'm showing right now the cup, the official Onwards cup, which has the cutout action figure emblazoned.
We'll take a picture of that. Yeah.
Onwards. Well, I'll tell you honestly, my father had a little saying, attitude. And I thought attitude was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But
you're like, I could do better.
I was like, I could do better. So I came up with Onwards, and I'll tell you, I have failed so many times in my life. I have failed so many efforts that at a certain point, I had to just pick myself up off the floor and say, well, this sucks. Now we're going to move onwards. So onwards is both a kind of acknowledgement that you got knocked down and that you didn't know where you were and you were blinking, but also that you're going to go forward and no doubt get knocked down again, and you're going to continue. And hopefully you'll make it past 60, right? I mean, so that onwards, that's what onwards is. It is an acknowledgement that if you try, you're probably going to fail more than you succeed. And if that's not the ratio, maybe you should try more.
Well, thank you for that. So if you folks like this, I'm going to put in the exhibits the Joel Warner feature for
great.
William that goes in a lot more detail about his life and about his 4 rules for literature in life.
That was a great article.
Persona. Yeah, that's
Joel did a great job. He shaped a good story. But
William,
don't we have some bonus material?
We're going to get
cover?
to that. I'm going to turn this off and then restart it though. So we're going to wrap up here.
Because the bonus material. That's what I'm here
He's
for.
excited about it. Yeah.
We're going to talk about motorcycles. Okay, now we're going to turn to what normally would be bonus material for people who sign up for the community, but I'm adding it here. Get ready to hear us talk about riding motorcycles. Let's go. All right, we're back with William Kuskin and Kim Terabeel for a little bonus material. Thanks for joining us.
I've been waiting the whole podcast for the bonus.
For the good stuff. So I wanted to talk about motorcycles with you. And one is because you ride a motorcycle and I don't. And Kim doesn't, but wants to.
I want to.
So we have
Kim. All right.
Right, so
we're going to get you on a motorcycle by the end of this 15-minute interview.
You two will bond over this. I'm not interested in riding a motorcycle, I'll be honest. And yet
you're going to California.
That's the last place you want to ride a motorcycle. There's too many people.
I'm going to California. We could go on motorcycles.
So the reason to bring up motorcycles is it just seems like the ultimate solo activity. You know, like motorcycles really are built for one person. You know, I mean, you may put 2 people on them, but really they're made for one person. And so, why don't we start with Kim and talk a little bit about why you want to ride a motorcycle?
Okay.
What is it? Should I be saying ride a motorcycle, drive a motor? You ride a motorcycle.
Okay.
You don't drive a motorcycle.
You don't drive a motorcycle.
Okay,
you drive one of those new 3-wheeled contraptions
how uncool
that Polaris is selling now.
Okay, so I always wanted to ride a motorcycle because it was like a defiant thing towards my parents, I guess. My dad was in a really bad motorcycle accident in the 70s. And that's actually how he met my mom. So as a little rebellious teenage, she was his like physical therapist in the hospital.
Wow. Oh, what's that? There's a saying about when you fall in love with your nurse. It's the something syndrome. Florence Nightingale effect.
Oh, yeah. So my mom, Florence Nightingale all the way.
I see.
But I wanted to do it and I was forbidden to. So the first time I was on a motorcycle actually was probably when I was like 25. I was living in Hawaii and there was an ex-Marine riding around the island. He was like 45 and I got on the back of his motorcycle and it was so fun. I still actually think about that a lot. But I think that was the only time.
Do you still text
No,
with him?
I don't. I don't even think text messaging was a thing back then. No, it was awesome. He had this whole pack of guys and we rode up to the top of the island to a bar. It just felt super dangerous and exhilarating. So, yeah.
And so so you had this great experience. It was defiant and exhilarating. And what did you think about translating that into your own experience of owning one?
Well, now I'm afraid of everything. Like I won't even go rollerblading. I'm petrified, you know?
We were doing a podcast episode the other day and she rode to my house on the sidewalks.
Well, no, because that was because it would have taken a lot to cross 30th twice. But yeah, I did. And I had a giant helmet on. Yeah. No, safety first, people.
Interesting.
So I'm actually looking at your motorcycle. Well, it's on the inside of your arm, but you just showed us your motorcycle tattoo.
Yes. So tell us your motorcycle story. Convince Kim to ride.
Well, so I guess the first rule of motorcycling, because there's rules here too.
Okay.
The first rule of motorcycling is ride your own ride. And that is the most important rule of motorcycling and of life.
What does that mean?
And that means go at your own pace and make your own decision. Because the way you get hurt motorcycling is by following somebody who's going real fast and who's had 6 or 7 beers, and then they have some more beers, and you feel like, well, I'm riding with Pete, so I got to have some beers, and that leads to ruin. So
That is a good rule in life. Ride your own ride.
It's a rule to life. Ride your own ride. So all I can say is motorcycles have saved my life. Motorcycles to me, they are such symbolic vehicles, and they symbolize all that defiance, Marlon Brando's
They're
swagger.
sexy. Guys, go get a motorcycle.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
So this is the thought experiment I like when it comes to, I like to do these thought experiments, which is like, if X didn't exist today, would it be made the same way? Right. So for example, if the car hadn't been invented yet and it was invented today, would we then all of a sudden start paving all these roads and make this thing the centerpiece of our transportation? And the answer obviously is no, right? So when you're in Santa Monica and people are complaining about these little scooters, you're just like, why are we complaining about these scooters? We should be complaining about these enormous cars, that are really the problem. And so, I think that thought experiment is, if motorcycles were invented today and people were like, okay, we're going to let people ride around on these motorcycles with just this piece of plastic on your head, the government would be like, no, you're not. And so
I'm actually this thought experiment is near and dear to my heart. I'm giving a paper next month called Batman's Motorcycle, and it is a thought piece about the place of motorcycles in the next 10 years. And motorcycle sales right now are crashing through the floor. Millennials don't want to ride motorcycles. In part, they're dangerous.
Millennials don't even want to have sex, so
Right.
they're not going to be.
Well, millennials can just sit home and don't they play it on video games?
Right.
You can do it. You can simulate the whole thing.
You can't drink a latte and text and motorcycle. So I think also,
Hey, by the way, I like millennials. It was just such a cheap joke. I couldn't help myself.
But also, the world of motorcycles has passed. I mean, we're moving into this world of ride sharing and electric vehicles, and the
autonomous driving.
Right, autonomous driving, where really the whole premise of the motorcycle is that no one knows where you are, right? The Marine took you up to the bar on the mountain.
I know, that sounds so dangerous.
Because, and I mean, it's just, no one knew where you were, right? And were you alive or dead? Oh my God, Kim. But that's not where we're going. Mm-hmm. Where we're going is a Tesla that you don't drive, that Elon is, watching on a screen, and it's got your heart rate monitored as well as, your spending patterns.
It knows if you're masturbating, basically.
He does, yes. Right. So the motorcycle is kind of counter to all that. And to me, what I love about motorcycling is that it's all real, right? I mean, you're right to be afraid of motorcycles because you could get killed, right? Mm-hmm. And what it makes you do is focus your fear and conquer it with every ride. And to me, that's really about the lifeblood of being human, because if you're riding a motorcycle slowly or quickly, you better be in a state of awareness and of control. And there's a great book called Twist of the Wrist, written by a motorcycle racer called Keith Code. And he talks about fear reactions as being exactly counter to what you need to do. So your fear reaction says, close the throttle, nail the brake. But doing that will upset the motorcycle horribly. And closing the throttle shifts all the way to the front. It upsets the rear. Grabbing the brake makes the bike stand up or alternately slide. So it's exactly what you don't want to do when you're afraid, because those things will make you more afraid. And so in a nutshell, that's my another powerful metaphor for me for life. Because when you're afraid, or when you're angry, or when you're overwhelmed, you often do things, right, that are exactly what you shouldn't be doing, right? You yell at your partner, right? Or you pull on the leash of the dog, right? And these are things that if you thought it through, you'd never do. Mm-hmm. So for me, motorcycling is very much about, we talked in the last podcast about having a sense of intentional control over your life and thinking through. Well, motorcycling, you can plot about 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 30 seconds ahead of what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. So it's another way of thinking about intentionality, but it's a much more visceral way of thinking about it.
I would imagine you have to be incredibly present when you're driving a motorcycle.
You better be present. Yeah. You better be present.
Yeah. So wait, how did it save your life exactly?
So, in high school, I was a loner and a shut-in and a pretty pudgy little guy. And, I bought my first motorcycle. I had it tattooed on my arm. And boy, did it change my life.
You got all the babes, right?
Well, I was not ready for babes, but they were ready to ride on the back of the motorcycle.
Yeah.
And even in my completely self-destructive way, I couldn't keep them off the back seat. Now, that doesn't mean I went home with anybody, but I sure shuttled them around.
Yeah, look, that when you're at that age, that's remarkable, right?
What about at my age now?
Yeah.
It's even more remarkable.
All right, so let's get practical for a moment before we wrap this, and say, suppose someone's like Kim, and thinking about it. They're like, they've always been tempted to think about it, but they're rational. They understand there's risks and so on.
So what you got to do?
Yeah. So what are the three things that you need to do?
You got to go up to the Harley place and take the rider training course. They once they cotton that you're going to spend some money, they'll hook you up with that rider training course. And the rider training course, motorcycling, as Keith Code points out, it's not intuitive. Your fear takes over. You start making mistakes. You need to take a course that's going to tell you how to manipulate the controls correctly. And there's just some basic rules to riding a motorcycle. Use the front brake. That's your friend, right? Don't drink and drive. Counter steer, which is, you don't lean into a curve. You do lean into a curve, but you manipulate the handlebars so it forces the motorcycle to lean over.
I see.
So they'll just teach you that. The second thing is, I think you have to set aside some money, because beginners often buy the shittiest motorcycles, and then that sucks, right? Because they have a shitty experience.
Mm-hmm.
You need to set aside some money for some good protective gear, helmet, jacket, and all that's fun stuff, right?
And medical bills, right?
It's cool. You get to buy boots and wear leather pants.
Right.
And oh no, this is legitimate.
So I have an ex who rides a motorcycle, and I asked her how she gets her motorcycles, and she says, so this is, Kim, this is how you get your motorcycle, I think. She goes, I always get them the same way. Go on Craigslist, and I get a used motorcycle, and it's some guy who just got engaged to be married.
There you go.
And he's basically he's like, folks, it's happened. I'm engaged.
Right. And
I got to get rid of the motorcycle.
So I am remarkably short. So the challenge for me has always been to feel comfortable on motorcycle at low speeds. So I have ridden all kinds of motorcycles. For a long time, I had a love affair with Italian motorcycles, which was great, but I could never touch the floor, right?
Okay.
So now I've settled on Harley Davidson because you can plant your feet. So another thing I would say is, Kim, go find a motorcycle, used, new, where you can plant your feet, because boy, do you feel good in a parking lot. You can always put your feet down. You can push, you can walk around. It's less threatening.
I see.
So ride your own ride. Take the safety course.
Yes.
Buy a good motorcycle, not a crummy motorcycle, and find one that you're really comfortable on. And don't let tall guys like Pete tell you, it doesn't matter if you can plant your feet because you're driving, right? You're riding. It doesn't matter. And they'll and then you fall over and you feel like a jerk. And he's standing there with his giant motorcycle saying, "What happened?"
The last part won't ever happen. So.
No.
But the greatest thing about motorcycles is when you go on an adventure and you're like 3 nights out in some motel in Wyoming, and you realize this thing, this 200 to 500 pound thing has led you on this adventure, and you're out in the world. It's an amazing head clearing solo experience.
Yeah, it's great.
It's great.
All right. I think you convinced me.
We'll check in later with
You
that.
say the word, and I'll take you up to the Harley place. We'll look at motorcycles together.
That'd be great. All right, you two. That was super fun. As good as I expected. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
Onward. Say it, Kim.
Onwards.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.